was elbow deep in a recycling bin behind a Michelin star restaurant in San Francisco, digging for copper wire. When the trajectory of my life snapped back into place, a woman in a pristine trench coat stepped over a puddle of grease. Ignoring the stench of rotting vegetables, I froze, holding a jagged piece of metal. My hands stained black. She didn't look at the trash. She looked at me. "Excuse me. Are you Isabella Sterling?" she asked. I nodded, bracing for an eviction notice. She smiled. "My name is Elena. I am an attorney. Your great-uncle Alistair just died. He left you a $92 million culinary empire. But there is one condition. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community." I stared at her, the rain dripping off the brim of my cap. $92 million. The number felt abstract, like a coordinate on a map I had lost years ago. 3 months prior, I had been living in a penthouse in Silicon Valley, hosting dinners for venture capitalists who controlled half the tech industry. Now, I was selling scrap metal to buy a sandwich. Elena gestured toward a black sedan idling at the curb. The leather interior smelled like old money and lavender. As we drove away from the alley, watching the city blur through the rain-streaked glass, my stomach tightened, not from hunger, but from memory. My ex-husband, Julian, would have laughed. He would have called this a clerical error. Julian was 34, a tech venture capitalist who treated human beings like lines of code. If you were useful, you were optimized. If you were not, you were deleted. We met when I was 22. A culinary student with flour in my hair and a scholarship to the Cordon Bleu. He was charming then. He told me he loved my passion. He told me he wanted to build a world where I could create without worrying about rent. It took me 7 years to realize he did not want a partner. He wanted a garnish. Within 6 months of our wedding, my culinary school enrollment was canceled. Julian suggested it was better for his image if I focused on managing our social calendar. "You are the face of our brand, Bella," he had said, smoothing my hair like I was a purebred dog. "Why stress yourself in a hot, dirty kitchen when you can run the house?" It sounded reasonable. It sounded like love. It was actually a hostile takeover of my identity. For 7 years, I became the ghost in my own life. I hosted dinner parties that became legendary in the valley. I spent 18 hours a day sourcing ingredients, fermenting misos, and deconstructing sauces. When the guests arrived, Julian would stand at the head of the table, pouring wine, accepting compliments on the meal, as if he had personally foraged the mushrooms. My role was to sit, smile, and look expensive. Once, when a potential investor asked about the complex flavor profile of the duck confit, I started to explain the 3-day curing process. Julian cut me off with a laugh. Bella just follows the recipes I find for her. It is a cute hobby. Is it not? The table laughed. I smiled. But under the table, my hands were clenched so hard, my nails cut into my palms. That was the dynamic. I was the labor. He was the brand. When he traded me in for a 24-year-old model who did not know a whisk from a wrench, the divorce was surgical. The prenup I had signed at 22 was ironclad. I had no assets. No income history. And no claim to the life I had built for him. His parting words were not angry. They were dismissive. Which was worse. I stood in the foyer with 2 suitcases, pleading with him. I told him I had nowhere to go. I told him I had given up my career for his. He checked his watch, annoyed that this emotional scene was making him late for squash. "Good luck, Bella," he said. "But let us be honest. Nobody wants a 30-year-old housewife with no resume. You were an ornament, and ornaments do not belong in the kitchen." I ended up in a motel, then a car, then the shelter. The fall from the penthouse to the pavement took exactly 6 weeks. I thought I had lost everything, but looking out the window of Elena's car as we turned through iron gates, I realized Julian was wrong. He had taken the house. He had taken the money, but he had made a critical calculation error. You can confiscate a chef's knives, but you cannot confiscate her palate. We pulled up to the Sterling estate, a sprawling mansion that looked more like a fortress. It had belonged to Alistair Sterling, a man I had not seen since I was 5. He was a culinary legend, a recluse who hated the modern food industry. Elena handed me a heavy iron key. Alistair followed your life from a distance, she said softly. He knew what you were going through. He knew you did not have a resume. He also knew you had something better. I took the key. It was cold and heavy. What is the condition? I asked. Elena pointed toward the main house. You have to take over as executive director of Sterling Gastronomy, immediately. You have 1 year to maintain the Michelin stars across all 12 global locations. If you fail, or if you sell out, the entire estate goes to a charity trust. I laughed. A dry, brittle sound. I cannot run a restaurant group. I said, my ex-husband convinced the world I am just a housewife who gets lucky with recipes. Elena looked at me, her eyes sharp. Alistair disagreed. He left you something in the garden house. He called it the glass kitchen. Go see for yourself. I walked across the wet lawn toward the garden house. It was a modern structure. Steel and glass. Hidden behind a grove of ancient oaks. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air smelled of ozone and herbs. It wasn't just a kitchen. It was a laboratory. Vacuum sealers. Centrifuges. Rotary evaporators. Equipment worth millions. But what caught my eye wasn't the technology. It was the far wall. It was lined with shelves. And on those shelves were 24 hand-bound leather journals. I walked over and pulled one down. The leather was worn, soft from handling. I opened it. The handwriting was mine. These were my journals. My recipes. For 7 years. While Julian slept. While he was at conferences. While he was ignoring me. I had been in my kitchen at 3 a.m. I wasn't just making dinner. I was studying. I was deconstructing classical French sauces and rebuilding them with molecular techniques. I was fermenting garum from local seafood. I was documenting everything. Every failure. Every breakthrough. I realized then that I hadn't been a housewife playing chef. I had been an elite athlete training in the dark. Alistair must have had someone watching me. Someone collecting these journals from the trash where I'd hidden them. Or maybe he'd bought them from the staff. It didn't matter. What mattered was that he saw the work. He saw the 10,000 hours of invisible labor I had poured into a craft that my husband called a hobby. I ran my hand over the pages. Diagrams of protein structures. Tasting notes on heirloom tomatoes. I wasn't empty-handed. I had the receipts. I had the proof that my competence wasn't a gift. It was earned. The next morning, I walked into the boardroom of Sterling Gastronomy. 12 people sat around a table made of reclaimed wood. They looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. At the head of the table sat Gavin. He was 40. The executive chef of the flagship restaurant. A man who had built his career on intimidation and ego. He didn't stand up. So, he said, leaning back in his chair. The prodigal niece returns. I hear you make a decent roast chicken. I didn't sit down. I walked to the head of the table. Gavin didn't move. I looked at him. You're in my seat. I said. The room went silent. Gavin laughed. A short, barking sound. I don't think you understand how this works. Sweetheart, you might own the paper, but I own the kitchen. We're doing a tasting today. A blind tasting. If you can identify the components of my new signature sauce, I'll move. If not, you stay out of my way and let the professionals work. He snapped his fingers. A server brought out a small white bowl. Inside was a dark, glossy sauce. It smelled of smoke and earth. I picked up a spoon. I didn't taste it immediately. I smelled it. First, the top notes. Charred onion, thyme. Then the base. Veal stock. Red wine. But there was something else. Something familiar. I took a small sip. The flavor hit my palate like a memory. It was rich. Complex. With a lingering heat that wasn't pepper. I set the spoon down. It's excellent, I said. Gavin smirked. Thank you. It took me 6 months to perfect. No, it didn't, I said. It took you 3 years. And it didn't take you any time at all. Because you didn't create it. The room got very quiet. You're using smoked paprika. Specifically, pimentón de la vera. But you're also using a reduction of black garlic and espresso. And the heat? That's not chili. That's ginger. Juiced and clarified. Gavin's smile faltered. Anyone with a good palate could guess that. Maybe. I said. But only the person who wrote the recipe would know that the espresso has to be cold brewed for 18 hours to avoid bitterness. I pulled the leather journal from my bag and opened it to a marked page. December 2019. Christmas menu for Julian's investors. I called it the Midnight Juice. I see you kept the name. I slid the book across the table. Gavin stared at it. The other board members leaned in. I realized then what had happened. Julian hadn't just dismissed my cooking. He had been feeding my recipes to Gavin. He had been using my work to buy influence, to build connections, probably in exchange for investment in his tech firm. My intellectual property had been the currency of his success, and Gavin had been the beneficiary. I looked at the board. This man has been serving my work as his own for 5 years. He is not a chef. He is a photocopier, and a bad one, because he forgot the final step, a drop of sherry vinegar to cut the fat. That's why it tastes heavy. Gavin stood up, his face red. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to be lectured by a housewife. You're fired, I said. Security is waiting in the lobby. Gavin looked around the room for support. None came. He stormed out, slamming the door. I looked at the young sous chef sitting in the corner. His name was Leo. I had read his file. He was talented, undervalued, and hungry. Leo, I said, you're the new chef de cuisine. We have a Michelin inspection in 2 weeks. Let's get to work. 2 weeks later, the night of the Michelin inspection arrived like a storm front. The air in the restaurant was heavy with static. We were fully booked. Every table was a stage, and the inspector could be anyone, the lone diner in the corner, the couple arguing by the window. I had spent 14 days retraining the brigade, breaking Gavin's culture of fear and replacing it with precision. We were ready, or so I thought. At 5 o'clock, 1 hour before service, I walked into the kitchen. It should have been a symphony of chopping, searing, and shouting. Instead, it was silent. The kind of silence you hear at a funeral. The brigade was standing around the prep stations, heads bowed. Leo was leaning against the pass, his face gray. I smelled it before I saw it. The sharp, chemical sting of chlorine. I walked to the meat station. 50 pounds of A5 Wagyu beef, imported that morning, were sitting in their trays. Turning a sickly gray, they were covered in bleach. I moved to the walk-in. The fish, the scallops, the truffles all doused in industrial cleaner. I went to the pass. The digital ticket system was black. The screens were dead. The hard drives containing our inventory, our recipes, and our reservations had been wiped. Leo looked up at me, his voice cracking. He got in. Gavin used his old keycard before security could deactivate it. He destroyed the mise en place. He wiped the servers. We have no food. We have no system. We have to cancel service. Chef, we have to close the doors. I stood there, looking at the ruin of my kitchen. The smell of bleach was suffocating. This wasn't just vandalism. This was an execution. Gavin, and by extension, Julian, didn't just want me to fail. They wanted me to be humiliated. They wanted me to walk out into that dining room and tell the world that the housewife couldn't handle the heat. Panic tried to claw its way up my throat. I felt the familiar urge to shrink, to apologize, to disappear. But then I looked at the trash bins. They were filled with carrot tops, potato skins, onion roots, fish bones, the scraps Gavin had tossed aside because he didn't consider them food. To him, they were garbage. Just like he saw me. I lifted a handful of carrot peels, bright, crisp, earthy. Lock the doors. I told Leo. No one leaves. Chef, he whispered. We can't serve garbage to a Michelin inspector. When I lived in my car, I said to the brigade, I learned hunger. I learned that what people throw away is often more valuable than what they keep. We're not canceling service. We're changing the menu. Tonight, we're not serving luxury. We're serving truth. I dumped the scraps onto the steel table. We're cooking scraps. Leo, fish bones consommé. Maria, potato skins, fry them, and dust with mushroom powder. We have 45 minutes. Move. The kitchen erupted into a frantic, creative storm. No recipes. Only instinct and survival. I skimmed the broth, thinking of kintsugi repairing cracks with gold, honoring the breakage. That was what we were doing, binding broken ingredients and broken parts of my life into something whole. At 6, the doors opened. The inspector alone. Precise ordered the tasting menu. The first dish, potato skin soufflé with leek ash. Plates returned clean. Then came the centerpiece, compost consommé, a clear broth of roasted bones and roots, with a dumpling made from scallop trimmings. I watched as she tasted it. She closed her eyes, not analyzing, but feeling. It tasted like redemption. The dining room buzzed with discovery. When she finished, she asked for me. This was the most audacious meal I've ever eaten. She said, "You didn't serve luxury. You served soul." Who designed it? Necessity. I answered. We kept our stars and gained fame. The scraps menu became a phenomenon. Fully booked for months. 6 months later, our valuation had tripled. That was when the offer came. Vanguard Holdings wanted to buy the Sterling Group for $650 million. The board was ecstatic. Elena told me I'd walk away with $300 million. But something felt wrong. I had hair dig deeper. Vanguard was a shell. The hidden beneficiary, Julian, unable to destroy me. He wanted to own me. I arranged to meet him at table 9. He arrived immaculate, smiling like a shark. "Bella," he said. "You got lucky. Take the payout." "No," I said. "You'll never own this." His charm evaporated. He threatened litigation, promised to bury me. I handed him a folder proof the sabotage payments to Gavin traced back to his firm. "If you come after me," I said, "this goes public." He went pale. There was nothing left for him to say. That night, I called Elena. "Use this quarter's dividend," I said. "I'm starting a foundation. Full scholarships and housing for people who are homeless or displaced. I want to put knives in the hands of people who think they're broken." I looked at my old journals, the record of a life I'd rebuilt. I had filled the cracks with gold. I wasn't just whole. I was art.